Welcome back to this beautiful lake job, guys. We are on this somewhat modern build here, at least in Indiana terms. It's a very modern build, and we are tackling a ton of acoustic slat panel ceilings. As you can see here, we've got our ceiling framing in, our electrical and audio is all wired up. We've got insulation in, and now it is time to go to work. I didn't take any video of us actually framing out these ceilings, but it was very important that we got these ceilings nice and flat so that we didn't see any humps or dips in the acoustic panels after they were installed. In order to help that, we actually jointed one edge of all of our 2x4s in the shop and assembled our ceiling drops as units in the shop. Then we actually just brought them on site and fastened them directly to the ceiling already prefabricated. Now, it's really important to understand this is not the type of work that you can just jump into and go gung-ho. Before we started framing these ceiling drops, I drew everything up in SketchUp in order to lay out everything perfectly so that we could end with a perfect margin all the way around the perimeter of each of these ceilings. Given that we were going to be using framing material, I intentionally undersized my framing drops just a little bit so that I would have some wiggle room once we were actually on site and started to install the panels. So the first thing you're going to see me doing is figuring out what the actual width of the panels is going to be whenever I stack a bunch of them together, and then shimming out the side of my framing drop so that we can end perfectly with the same reveal on the outside as we have between the slats of each of these panels. Now, the first thing I need to do is figure out exactly what the finished width of my panels are going to be so that I can end up with that exact 3/8 reveal whenever I'm finished around the perimeter. Best way to do that is to stack a bunch of panels together and get true measurements on what they actually are whenever they stack up. I might be able to figure 11 3/4 for one panel, but when you actually multiply that out by 20 panels, odds are you're not going to end up where you think you're going to end up. And that's where stacking all of these together and making a list of measurements per panels will really help you figure things out down the road. So here I know that 10 panels equals 1/18 and a 16th. So I'm holding my tape off at 1/18 and a 16th on the edge of this panel. And then I'm going to look at the measurement that I actually need. So here I'm doing the math. And I'm going to write down what I actually have to my reveal, and then I'm going to write what I need to the reveal, and then I'm going to take that difference, and then I'm going to divide that by 2, and that is how much I need to shim on both ends to widen my framing so that I end up where I need to. That is probably really confusing and doesn't make any sense, but that's what I'm doing. And you'll see that whenever I put the shims on. Now, one note, I don't want to try to shim extremely precisely. I want to undersize it a little bit. So I'm actually taking a 16th off both ends, and that'll give me some wiggle room. Again, the level of precision that we're shooting for here is literally exactly to a 16th whenever we finish. We need it to finish with that exact 3/8 inch reveal all the way around. So you really have to think ahead, do the math right, but also strategically give yourself some wiggle room where you need it. And here you can see I determined that I need 5/16 of shim on both ends. One of my favorite tools and favorite ways to shim is with a hot glue gun. These cordless hot glue guns are awesome. You can just cut whatever shims you need and then put a little glue on the back and stick them in place, and it's really easy. Next, we're going to start installing our perimeter trims. Pretty simple. This is a fabricated trim that we made that we're putting around the perimeter. This will give us the ledge detail that we need for our LED lighting, and then our 1x2 white oak piece that goes around the perimeter of the slat wall to finish everything off will attach to that. So that's pretty easy to get up. We actually just screw through the framing material into the back side of that perimeter trim. But here we are, we're putting in the acoustic panels. Really important to try to get these things started. And you'll notice that we are actually leaving them all long. And we actually had done a couple ceilings before we started this one and found out that we just could not get things lining up the way that we wanted to because of the nature of the felt on these panels, and because some of them are actually bowed a little bit. It was extremely difficult to get a square cut on them to get everything to line up. So I kind of made the call that, hey, we're going to actually just install these on the ceiling long, and we're going to cut them in place with a track saw on the ceiling so that we've actually got a perfectly straight line. It was a little bit of a cowboy move, but it gave us excellent results, as you'll see in a little bit. Fastening these panels was pretty simple. It definitely goes a little bit easier and faster with two guys doing it. We did do it solo some, using a jig that we would screw to the ceiling to support one end while we tack the other end in place. That worked well. Biggest thing, you just saw me right there, was wiping my hands off. This is white oak, and if you had any kind of dirt or grime on your hands and you pushed on that slat, it would leave this nasty mark on it. So we really had to pay attention to keeping our hands clean as we were installing this stuff, and we actually kind of learned to strategically not use the inside of our hand. As we were putting it up, we would actually push up with our knuckles and the outside of our arms and stuff like that to avoid the greasy fingertips and palms leaving marks on the material. So how are we fastening these? We're actually just using drywall screws. The drywall screws going into that black felt really disappear well. You can't even hardly tell they're there. And you definitely don't want to try to face nail through this stuff. That would look like an absolute disaster. But drywall screws through that black felt supported it pretty well. I thought about using adhesive at first, but then kind of realized it just wasn't necessary, and it was going to make the panels permanent. Whereas the way we're doing it here, if you need to take down a panel to fish a wire or something like that, you can easily take it down without destroying it or damaging it. Now you will notice that this end panel is cut to the finished length. The reason for that is the track saw wouldn't be able to cut all the way to the end because of how close it is to the wall. At this point, we need to cut our panels to length before we can move forward. We're starting off by chalking a line, and then we'll make our through cut all the way end to end. Now, our two very end panels at the start and end of this run are already cut to length. So we're basically connecting the dots between those 2 points. You'll notice here I actually cut this 3 different times. That's because I was sneaking up on the cut. I didn't have the track quite where it needed to be, and you just really notice if these cuts aren't perfect. So I kept sneaking up on it until I was happy with where I was at. And that's just kind of been the nature of the beast with this install. You just got to be extremely precise. I forgot to mention before we started that we chalked a very light line with a fine chalk line across the end. That helps us kind of align the track saw splinter guard exactly where it needs to be. I will also say that having a fresh splinter guard on your track saw makes it so much easier to line things up. After we get our through cut done with the track saw, we have to chalk another line 3/8 back off of our cut edge that we just cut for our reveal cut. Now the most important thing is to set the track saw to the proper depth so that we're only cutting the slat and not any of the acoustic panel. It's about 3/8 deep, so then we just very carefully set the track saw at the proper depth and make our rabbet cut to cut off those little nubs to give us that 3/8 reveal all the way around. This is where it gets sketchy. On the center cut, we had nowhere to use a clamp because of the framing material being in the way, so Paul is literally pressing up as hard as he can to hold the track in place to make these cuts down the center. And blowing myself off after I got done cutting. So we're getting ready to cut off our end here, and you'll see that the panels that I finished off with, I cut to the finished length. We're slightly overhanging our perimeter trim detail here, about a 1/16 or so. So we'll cut this completely off, and then we'll come back and we'll make another cut for this rabbet cut so that we've got a perfectly straight line all the way across here. Here on the other end, you see the same thing. We cut the end piece to the finished length with the rabbet. That way, if we can't get the track saw to make the cut all the way through, we're covered that way. Now we've finished the rest of the install of the panels, and it's time to flush cut the ends again and make our rabbet cut. This is a little better view. You can see we got the track in place. We're able to clamp it on the perimeter detail with that L trim hanging over. Paul's kind of helping hold the track up in place. Pretty easy to cut that off where it needs to be. So then we're going to move over 3/8, chalk a nice line, make sure it's straight, and get the track in place again and prepare to make the next rabbet cut. The key when you're making a cut like this is good footwork, and you just got to maintain that upward pressure on the saw. Otherwise it's going to come off the track and you're going to have a bad day. But here we are again, getting it lined up absolutely perfect. You really have to take your time to make sure it's just right. And sometimes it takes moving some clamps around, but you can see that rabbet cut there looks really good. So now we're getting ready to cut the center reveal, and you'll see that we have the edges butted up together. Whenever we installed this row of panels first, we ran them long, and then we hit this edge with a track saw to cut all of these panels off straight. So we butted over, so we'll just measure over our 3/8 reveal and make a cut along there to get our reveal down the center. And again, you'll notice all the way at the end, I have my end panel already cut with the reveal detail on it. Same thing on the other end. So we'll just probably chalk a line along here and connect the dots. Now we have the scariest cut. That's the cut down the center of the room to make the rabbet cut, but we cannot clamp the track in place, so Paul has to hold it in place while I cut. We can get a clamp on the end, but nothing down the center. But it works pretty good. You just got to make sure you know what you're doing and really take your time and keep that upward pressure on the saw all the way through the cut. But here you see we've maintained perfect spacing, and we've got that perfect 3/8 reveal all the way around the perimeter. So now we can start adding our 1x2 perimeter trim. Now the problem that we have is that all the way around these ceiling trays, there's only a 4-inch space between our slat panel and the other side of the tray, which is not enough space to get a nail gun in there or a screw gun. So I came up with this detail to use the Lamello K20 biscuits. Now, if you're not familiar with these biscuits, it uses a standard biscuit slot, just like you would with any biscuit joiner, but it's a barbed biscuit, so that once you put it together, it actually has holding power. So whenever we prefabricated these perimeter trim moldings, we routed this groove before they were pre-finished. That way we could just put a bunch of these Lamello K20 biscuits in that groove, put it in place, and then basically with just some pressure putting that 1x2 in place, it's gonna hold there. So we did apply some PL premium adhesive in the groove with those biscuits just to make sure that it holds long term. But I'll tell you what, this whole system worked phenomenally well. You can see as we try to hammer this in, there's just no space. So there was just really no chance of using a nail gun without causing a lot of issues. But being able to use those biscuits was absolute money. It worked fantastic. And honestly, it probably saved more time in the long run versus trying to just hold it in place and nail it. And it was very precise because we milled our groove exactly where it needed to be, so we didn't even have to worry about alignment. This was one of the 8 acoustic paneled ceilings that we had in this house. This was the primary bedroom, and it came together really well. Here's another end view of how we're clamping the track up to the ceiling with the Festool clamps. You can see that perimeter trim piece, and you can see I've still got a little bit more to cut off on the very end here. Overall, it worked pretty well. You just really have to make sure you're pushing up with the saw and you keep contact upwards all the time. That way nothing slips. Here you can see how the side of the saw looks, making that through cut all the way through. You know, the TSC 55 is just a clutch saw for jobs like this. Makes it well worth the price paid, and it was really the right tool for the job here. What we just got done doing is making our straight cut across this edge. So now it's perfectly straight. We're sticking out past our trim piece here, maybe a 16th. We want to be just a little bit proud. And now we've chalked a line from our rabbet detail here all the way across. So we'll put our track on this blue chalk line, set the saw at the exact correct depth, and make our cut. Biggest thing is to make sure that saw is set at the right depth before you start. One thing we found that with these slats being veneered, you really got some splintering with the blade, and we definitely found that if you slow your cut down quite a bit, that really helped with the splintering. But all of these end cuts we had to touch up with sandpaper after the cut was done. Here's another one of those high pressure cuts that we had. Basically, we couldn't clamp the track anywhere down the center. That meant that Paul had to hold the track in place while I cut it. Pretty high risk cut considering the amount of dollars and work that you have on the ceiling doing this, but the results speak for themselves. We ended up with perfectly straight, perfectly aligned, perfectly crisp cuts. And whenever we had previously tried to install these panel by panel, pre-cutting them, it was fine, but it just wasn't getting us the execution that we wanted, and this method was. Here's a clip in real time of making this rabbet cut, and you'll notice a couple things. One, I'm going very slow. I'm really consciously trying to cut slow to avoid splintering as much as possible. I'm also eating a ton of sawdust as I'm doing this, and on this section we were actually able to clamp it in the middle when we were making this cut because of the holes for the lights. We could just get one of these Festool clamps kind of wedged in there, and it worked out all right. Whenever we made the complete through cut though, we were cutting right over those metal pieces for the light boxes, so we cut just shy of full depth and finished with a utility knife. Back to these perimeter trims, I had no idea how we were going to get these installed when I saw the design concept plans, but these Lamello K20s were really perfect for this application. I really couldn't be happier with how the whole installation went regarding the K20s in this 1x2. Now, to give us that extra little bit of compression that we need for the K20s to really grab, we can just go along the perimeter and just apply some pressure with this jack clamp or whatever you call it, and it really pulls everything in nice and snug. Yep, go ahead. One other noteworthy thing that's definitely worth mentioning if you ever have to install any of these acoustic panels is that they are not stapled sufficiently at all. Whenever you go to screw these to the ceiling, if you don't add more staples, you'll find that as you fasten it, the felt will pull away from the slats and you'll get gappage. And also on your ends, they're only stapled from the factory about every 10 inches. So if you make a cut that happens to be just inside the staples, you'll end up with your slats flopping around on the end. So we added quite a bit of staples on every panel. We used 22 gauge staples with 5/8 legs, and it worked really well. Just made everything connected much better. Another key thing to watch out for is make sure that you don't have staples where you're going to need to cut with a track saw. Found that out the hard way a couple times. Just kind of makes it a pain in general. Well guys, that's going to be it for this one. If you would have told me before this install started that we were going to end up cutting all these panels on the ceiling in place with a track saw, I would have said you were crazy. But it ended up being that that's what we needed to do in order to get the results that we wanted. It was a little sketchy, but we didn't have any accidents and it turned out really good. So hopefully you enjoyed this one. I'm hoping I don't see any more acoustic panels for a good long while, but we're very satisfied with how this one turned out, and stay tuned to see hopefully some finished shots of this project when it's all done. We'll see you in the next video.